In the 14th chapter of Luke, there is a story of a great banquet feast. A master sends his servant to tell those he's invited to come. But the guests began to make excuses. I just bought some property and I want to go see it. I just bought some oxen and I need to inspect them. I just got married, so I can't come. So the master told his servant to go out quickly into the streets, the alleys, the roads, and the country lanes. Invite in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and have them come. In part, this is a story of accessibility and inclusiveness. It is a story of the culturally favored and the culturally forgotten, a story of inside and outside. This story reminds me of our guest artist, Kent Twitchell. Kent has committed his 40-year career to public art and the community of Los Angeles. He has always been committed to making his work accessible and available to the public. You don't need to go to art galleries or pay museum fees to see a Kent Twitchell work. You just need to head out into the streets and freeways of LA to see this generous man's work. His art is for everyone. Madeline Leangle, in her book, Walking on Water, Reflections on Art and Faith, says that to paint a picture or to write a story or to compose a song is an incarnational activity. The artist is a servant who is willing to be a birth giver. The servant artist, that describes Kent Twitchell. With 20 major murals throughout the greater LA art area, anyone can see his work. All one has to do is to look up. Like on Broadway and 2nd in downtown LA, or Temple Street and the Hollywood Freeway, on Western and Torrance Boulevard, or 111th and Vermont, on Fountain Avenue and Kingsley Drive, or on 7th and the 110 Freeway, in Inglewood, on Century Boulevard, or 8th Street and the Harbor Freeway. Kent Twitchell has become the muralist of LA, or according to the LA Times, the muralist of the world. I first met Kent in 1984 when I was a grad student at Claremont Graduate University. As the only Christian in my progressive and very secular grad program, I was constantly wrestling with the interface of my Christian faith and my discipline of art. So you can imagine my surprise and excitement when I opened the most recent edition of the journal Art Week to find this review, a revival of Christian art. The review opens with a quote by Twitchell. If Jesus were walking on earth today, that little troubled barrio around the liquor store is where he'd spend his time. Now, this is hardly the way that art reviews generally open. The review goes on to say, Twitchell, an art world maverick, has openly committed himself to Christ. It then goes on to say, throughout this century, religious art and mainstream contemporary art have run separate courses. Christian art has remained an outcast. Serious artists have shied away from it. But today, in conjunction with the 70s return to figuration, the new pluralism, and a recent groundswell of interest in the spiritual and the religious issues, artists like Twitchell are making specific references to Christian symbology. The article ends by saying, Twitchell's abiding faith in his Christian religion is paralleled only by his belief in the power of art to communicate. That was 1984. This was the same year he had completed his 7th Street altarpiece, one of 2 murals commissioned by the 1984 LA Olympic Committee for the LA Summer Olympics. It was also the year of dedication for the 111th Street Jesus. 1984. But Kent Twitchell had been active in the LA mural scene since 1971. He'd enlisted in the military right out of high school and went on to become an Air Force illustrator stationed in London. After his discharge, he moved to LA, where he studied art at East LA College and Cal State LA. He then went on to do his graduate study at Otis College of Art and Design in 1977. Since that time, he has played a major role in the LA art scene, and he has received national and international acclaim. In 1990, the city of Monterey Park decreed a Kent Twitchell Day in honor of his work that he had done in the city. The following year, he was awarded the City of Los Angeles' Artist of the Year. In 1995, he was designated a living treasure of Los Angeles. He's been awarded an honorary doctorate degree in the arts from Biola University, as well as from Otis College of Art and Design. 1989, this was the year he completed the Julius Erving project, and the same year he began to paint the Biola mural. Now, if I can, I'd like to say a word about the history of the word. I mentioned earlier that first meeting Kent in 1984. After I had read that article in Art Week, I contacted him, and within 6 months, we had formed a small professional artist fellowship in LA. That fellowship grew in numbers and impact to ultimately include artists from San Diego to Sacramento. In 1987, I joined the faculty at Biola, and Kent became enthusiastic about what the art department was doing. In 1988, he approached the department with an offer to do a major mural project on the campus at Biola. Now the plan was to create a major work of art for the university as a gift, in essence, from Kent and the art department. The work was to point directly at the person and authority of Christ. It was to draw attention to Biola's commitment to Christ and an art department. To produce an image that would indicate Biola Art Department's commitment to a robust understanding and engagement in Western art history and contemporary art. And to provide Biola art students with an experience painting and working on a major mural project. And then to place the work at the center of campus, symbolically relocating art from its marginalized position within the evangelical church, from the McNally campus to the heart of campus. Then the concept of the mural. Now this included the question of what kind of representation. And what I mean by that is, should it be a group portrait or a single figure portrait? Kent decided upon a single figure, and he selected a model for the Christ figure. He selected LA artist Jay Gam. This choice was consistent with his project at the time in using LA artists as models for his religious artworks. After extensive negotiation and preparation, work on the mural was ready to begin. A class was formed, Arts 410 Special Studies in Mural Painting, with visiting professor Kent Twitchell. There were 13 upper division students enrolled, and I think at the time that was about all the students we had at the senior level. Kent volunteered, and I want to stop and mention this, that Kent volunteered an entire semester of teaching. He wouldn't take pay from us. He provided all the materials, including the scaffolding, the wall preparation, the priming, all the art paint, and then after the semester, he quietly returned to campus for over 100 hours during the summer with an assistant to finish the work that the students had begun. And by the next academic year, the mural was dedicated, the Word. Approximately 1 year of preparation and 8 months working on the wall. I hope I've provided you with at least a cursory sense of this incredible artist and his work. And I want to take this opportunity to say that this man has had a deep and lasting impact on my life as an artist, as a teacher, and as a believer. I have been at Biola for over 20 years now, and it is in no small part that I am here because of Kent Twitchell. It is my deep and profound honor to introduce to you Dr. Kent Twitchell.
Kent, welcome to Biola University. Thank you for having me.
So glad you're here. This is a moment we've been waiting for a long time. It's interesting, we saw a little bit earlier the words of Dr. Tim Muehlhoff about perspective taking. And there's been a lot of conversation about the mural, the word, and perspective is so important. We thought what better idea than to have actually you, the artist, here on campus addressing. This is a pretty good crowd for late in the semester, by the way. Anxious to hear from you, for you, and I'm proud for you to meet our students as well. Just a wonderful group of men and women committed to excellence in all they do and committed certainly to the Lordship of Christ. And I know you are as well. So great introduction, Dan Callis, thank you. I'd like for you to begin by just sharing briefly a little bit about your story, your journey of faith, what God's done in your own pilgrimage with Him, and maybe how that has influenced your view of art.
I grew up in a small town in Michigan. My mother was the superintendent of the Sunday school in a little Methodist church, tiny little town, tiny little church. So I was at church all the time with my mom. And then one day, a guy came that was a short guy with kind of a rumpled suit, and he carried this Bible with him. And I had really never seen anyone in the church of any of the leaders carry a Bible before, and I was amazed at that. And it didn't look feminine to me. I thought of Christianity as being just a little bit on the feminine side. I grew up in the early 50s, late 40s, but this guy he could have been a halfback or something, and he carried this Bible around, and so that Bible really took on a symbol for me. And not only that, but when he spoke, unlike our pastor who never had a Bible, he always had little notes and things, he talked right out of the Bible, and it was all rumpled with all kinds of pages underlined. And I'd never seen that before. And he started talking about being born again. Well, I never had ever heard about being born again. I told my mother, what is this born again? I don't think I'm that. I don't think I am that thing. And she said, well, just keep going and we'll talk about it and so forth. But from that moment on, I was under stress anytime I heard anyone, like Billy Graham on the radio, whom I used to listen to a lot, talk about being born again. I knew I wasn't born again, and I knew I was a sinner. Unlike today, when you have to convince people they're sinners, in those days, everybody knew they were sinners. I had pictures of Marilyn Monroe on my wall, and I knew I was a sinner. But
that's the first sign.
Finally, she made a big decision, and she took us out of that little church, and we went to this place in Lansing called Miller Road Bible Church, where the pastor had the Bible with him all the time. And I remember I was there about 6 months, and he would give an altar call. And I would be struggling, sweat would be coming down my brow, my mother was standing. Finally, my mother got tired of watching this. I guess she had been seeing it. And she just sort of grabbed me by the shoulder and guided me down, and I became a born-again Christian. I was expecting bells and whistles and all kinds of magical things to happen. Nothing happened.
Right.
But for some reason, slowly, I began to realize that first thing I recognized is that from then on, I've never had any anxiety or any stress whenever there was an altar call. Never happened again. So that was the first thing I noticed.
Yeah.
But the Bible took on a really powerful symbol to me. When I came out to Los Angeles, and I had fallen away during the 60s. I became a cliche 60s radical left wing. It's embarrassing to even look back. I have no fond feelings for the 60s like so many people do. It was a time that I'd fallen away. And then I began to hear Dr. Lehman Strauss on the radio from Biola. I think they call it the Biola Hour. And I would listen to that all the time, and I realized that Biola stood for Bible Institute of Los Angeles. I thought, that is so bodacious. How gutsy can you get? and I just began to have this sort of mystical or feeling about this Biola. What is this Biola? And then, of course, I don't remember when it was, but Barry Kramis brought some students out to visit me a couple of times when I was working on a mural, and he was from Biola. And I thought, I was really nervous. Biola, this is the Bible Institute of Los Angeles coming to visit me. This was amazing stuff. And then slowly I began to have this relationship with Dan Callis, and we began to talk with Barry and about putting something on campus. And at first it was just going to be off across the street. But then the more it evolved into something in the middle of campus, I realized Biola, the center of our religion is Christ, and the Bible. So I thought, of course, Christ holding the Bible much as Moses holding the table of stones. And the most controversy I had at the time I was painting it, actually most of it was painted by students. I painted the face and the hands, but I think almost the entire body was painted by the students.
Let me ask you about maybe the whole idea of the genre of the mural. I mean, why did you choose to do murals as opposed to something else? And then I want to talk more specifically about this mural. But tell me, what does it mean to be a muralist? And a renowned muralist as well. I read regularly about the work that you're doing, just commissioned to restore Patriotic Hall, Bob Hope Hall in Los Angeles, and that historic site. What does it mean to be a muralist?
Well, first of all, I think in terms of being renowned, all you have to do is do something long enough and people start thinking you mean it. And I think that's that.
Got it.
Be revived. Just survive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think authenticity is the key. When I was in college and undergraduate, I did mostly abstract expressionism, and I was good at it because it was really design. I cheated. You're not supposed to have any design element in abstract expressionism. It's supposed to be a glorification of evolution and the accident and the wonders of accidents. And students were always stepping aside from their abstract pieces and talking about how this happened by accident and that happened by accident. But then when it came time, I had a teacher there who said, you can do anything you want, and you're going to get an A. So I thought, I've been wanting to do a mural for a long time. It was the 60s. And I had been doing little designs in the streets and psychedelic things and flowers and so forth. And when, cliche. But when it came time to really doing a mural that I signed, I had to do something that was real. And even though figurative art and realism were the brown shoes at a tuxedo event, that was me. Like it or not, that was who I was. I was a simple person who loved realism and loved figurative art. And so I painted Steve McQueen on a house in downtown Los Angeles. And my goodness, I thought I was the next Andy Warhol. The people called me from all over the world interviewing me because of this strange thing. But the art world, of course, didn't like it at all because I was going in the opposite direction of where they wanted art to be going. It was into conceptual art at that time. But it felt really good. And while I was painting that Steve McQueen, I was conceiving of my next mural, and I thought it would be a series of people that I admired. Very, very simply just people that I admired. But it's just never ended. That series continues to this day.
Tell me about conceiving this particular mural, which is located just 100 yards that way. The research, the preparation, your idea of authenticity. How did that all come into play as you were imagining this mural here at Biola University back in 1989-90?
Yeah, I had done a lot of, when I was a student at Otis, I began to see that there was a sort of misunderstanding about this notion of the separation of church and state, which was clearly never defined by the fathers the way it had been characterized. And whenever the dean would have a discussion about, for instance, Renaissance art, there would always be someone who would stand up and rail against this notion that we're discussing Virgin Mary. This is a painting of the Virgin Mary. How dare the school be having this conversation about the Virgin Mary, in spite of the fact that Leonardo da Vinci had painted it. You know, we have to censor this stuff out. And I began to think, I really am going to do something on this campus. And so I'm going to paint a religious painting right in the middle of campus on the outside. So everybody comes into the parking lot, they're going to look up at Christ, God the Father, and the Virgin Mary. And I took it from a Masaccio altarpiece. And I didn't tell anybody what it was. It was an underground piece, but it was on a government building. It was a county building. And so for my final thesis project, I painted this piece and never said a word. I was very subtle about it. It was just three people in white lab coats. I had created my own iconography, a stopwatch and Christ and various other things, many things. And then when the LA Times came to interview me, and they were very good about interviewing me for everything I'd ever done. They were very good to me. He finished and got ready to walk away with his notes, and he said, "Oh, by the way, what do you call it?" And I said, "The Holy Trinity with the Virgin." And he said, "What?" And he actually crumpled up his notes and started all over again. And then it was a big picture of it was in what was then the calendar section of the LA Times the next day. And there was all this controversy. Atheists hated it, Christians hated it, Jews hated it. I mean, I couldn't please anybody. And I had painted Billy Gray, who when I grew up on Father Knows Best, he was the son of the Father who knew best. That was part of my iconography. The son of the Father who knew best was Jesus. And I had chosen my longtime hero, the Lone Ranger, Clayton Moore, as God the Father, because no one had ever seen the face of the Lone Ranger and lived. And, and I grew up with Lassie, the television series. Jan Clayton, a marvelous Broadway actor who brought it to television. She was the mother, the chaste mother of Lassie, back when television really was about morality. And no husband, and I thought, this is the perfect Virgin Mary. And so these were symbols. I lived in Los Angeles, and artists have for years used models. Norman Rockwell did, local models, and I could use local models that were faces known all over the world. And all of these people agreed to paint for me. The Lone Ranger especially was a delight because he was like a kid, like me. I would go to his house, and we would sit on his floor and just play with his guns and just have a good time. And he just was delighted to be, and I was the first one he ever allowed to photograph him without his mask, because he always had these big sunglasses on whenever he would go anywhere in public. But after that, and then Peter Clothier brought me, he was the dean at the time, and he brought me into his office after the LA Times piece and all the controversy, and the phones were ringing off the hook. And I said, "Peter, I'm sorry. You know, I really didn't think this was going to happen. Please let me paint it out. I mean, I don't want anything bad for the school." And then he says, "No, he didn't want to paint it out." He says, "Write something about it." So I wrote about all the Virgins of Guadalupe's that are all over LA, and that I didn't paint any crosses, I didn't paint any scars on any hands. I simply painted 3 people in white lab coats with my own personal iconography. And it seemed like, as an American, I still, at that time, would have maybe the right to do that. You know, if I'm an artist and say I painted a group of trees and the trees represented crosses, probably it would be okay. That's all it was. And anyway, eventually it settled down. But when I had the opportunity to paint something at Biola, I thought, finally, I can paint an overt Jesus that won't threaten anyone.
When you thought about that Jesus, central to Biola and certainly central to, you know, everything that we believe that God is doing in this world through Christ, what did you have in mind in terms of what Jesus would look like, and maybe the model for Jesus, and how did you maybe conceive that idea?
I was always a student of literature. I love literature, I love poetry, and I love illusions, the whole concept of illusions. And so I thought, what I need to do is paint an allusion to Jesus. And I have no idea what Jesus looked like, but there is we know he was Jewish, and if I painted the Jesus of art history, throughout art history, and from my perspective, that means Western art history, because I'm an American that I grew up with Western art history. And so you take the Jesus of Caravaggio, of Rembrandt, and on it goes, that Jesus, and the Jesus of the Russian icons and the Baroque icons, and put them all together. That was what I came up with, was that Jesus. And it never occurred to me that that would be most of the controversy at the time was, well, what version of the Bible was he holding? That was what people were, yeah, that was because they wanted that Bible too, I said, I'll sell it to you. But I really didn't think that there would ever be any controversy about the color of his skin or anything like that.
Well, you use real models for all of your other murals as well as for this one. Tell me about your selection of this model. I
think he was a friend of Dan Callis, and I was over to Claremont one time, as I remember, and I saw this guy, tall, probably 6'2" or something, and he had this beard. I thought, oh my goodness, there he is. There's And so I remember I gave him $50, and I says, don't cut your hair or your beard until I call you again. And I'll call you in about 3 months or 4 months or whatever it was. And then I can't remember whether this was before or during. It seemed like, you can almost see the tracks of God in the sequence of events in your life so many times. And then the Biola mural was right about during that time. And I posed him. I can't remember where we were posing, but I put him on some crates. So I wanted him to be like a El Greco, really long, almost like a rocket. And so I stood him, as tall as he was, I stood him on some boxes, and then I pinned the mantle, the red mantle, down to the floor, so I would have this really powerful, tall, majestic, monumental, Jesus that reminded me of the cathedrals of England when I used to live over there. They were very inspiring, and they would sort of go up like that. I wanted him to look almost like he was coming up out of the ground like a building, and it had to be monumental. And I thought probably that the shadow should represent three. He and the two shadows, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I know that there were some people, and I have battled with it too. I was a sort of a Calvinist for a few years, and I know that there's a lot of Calvinist of the Calvinist persuasion who don't like there to be art about Christ. And so I studied all that too. I didn't want to do anything that would be wrong. My goodness, I prayed about it, and that doesn't mean that because I painted it after praying about it that it's right. I'm open. If it's wrong, I'd be the first to help get rid of it. But I really couldn't find anywhere in the Bible where it was wrong to paint a painting of Jesus. It would be impossible not to think of Jesus, since when he became a man, when God became a man, it's impossible not to think of him. And which was something that Barry Kramus said to me one day. It's impossible not to think of Jesus. So it's not like I'm doing something that it's all the times in the Bible that talks about imagery always has to do with worshiping imagery. It has nothing to do. Otherwise, we couldn't paint any art. All art would be censored by the Bible. And so I felt very free to go ahead and paint Jesus.
You alluded to it a little bit, Kent, but what did you really want to evoke as people came onto campus and saw? What was your real intention that you? I mean, we talk a lot about if we're reading a piece of literature, the author's intent. What did the author intend? And also, we have to understand the context of a piece of art. What did the artist intend? What did you really want to evoke out of the viewer when someone walked in campus and saw that piece of art?
I wanted it to be that the center of this campus was the Bible, and the center of this campus was the Word, and the center of this campus was Christ, and they were the same. It was like the Bible was a manifestation of the Word, of Logos. And I wanted it to be monumental, unapologetic, and unself-conscious. And I wanted people to be able to look up at it and be hushed by it, by this piece. I wanted them to realize that God is way, way, way beyond our capacity to approach, and yet he wants us to approach him. He's like a father.
The pages of the Bible, I think I heard you once say, were to reflect the Word made flesh. How did you, the pigmentation of the paint and...
Same. Yeah, the flesh of Christ that I put into his hand right next to the Bible and his head above the Bible are the same. The words, all the pages of the Bible are flesh tone. Things like that, I think, hit us subconsciously in ways that we don't see it all consciously, but just walking by it and noticing those things were just a compatibility between Christ the man and the pages of the Bible. The Bible is the inerrant Word of God, way, way, way beyond what the majority of Christians think of it as. It is a staggering book. I remember somebody once saying, holding the Bible up, he said, I can take this book and I can walk into Harvard or Oxford or any place on earth, and nobody can touch me. I mean, the intellectual capacity from the pages of this book alone, no one can touch him. And it's just that powerful of a book. That's why Satan is constantly trying to tell us that not to bother reading it. That's why so many Christians have to struggle every day to read that book. It's just so mighty.
We see the work of Kent Twitchell through one piece of art. Those of us who are here every day and not driving the highways of Los Angeles. But I want to understand you maybe a little bit through more the context of your art. We had lunch together back in the early part of October. It was, I think, shortly thereafter that I read in the LA Times that there were 2 big pieces of the Berlin Wall that were shipped to Los Angeles, and you were commissioned to, on one, paint a portrait of John F. Kennedy saying, "I am a Berliner." On the other, you were commissioned to paint a painting of Ronald Reagan saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down those walls." And we know that the Berlin Wall was such a symbol of division and separating people. Why was it important for you to take on that project, a project that represented the taking down of walls? Why was it important for you to take on that 111th Street Jesus on the side of a liquor store, a Latino-looking Jesus, which brought these 2 rival gangs together, under the image of Christ? And help us understand that as we think about this mural as one of your many pieces of art.
With the Berlin Wall piece, I was invited by the city of Los Angeles to be the artist that represented Los Angeles, and Terry Noir, who was the first person to paint on the Berlin Wall in the mid-'80s, who lived in Berlin, a French artist, was invited here, and the 2 of us were to attack this Berlin Wall. Originally, they didn't know what I was going to paint, and I told them that what I wanted to paint would be President Kennedy, who was my commander-in-chief when I was in the military, and Ronald Reagan, who was the first one to have guts enough to actually call it the evil empire, and against all advice, actually stood up and said, "Tear down this wall," together. That I thought they had more in common than a lot of people realized. And there's so much polarity in the political spectrum today. I thought this would be a way to bring it together. At first, oddly enough, they did not want me to paint Ronald Reagan, but they were happy with Kennedy. But they acquiesced to the pair of them, and that was how that came about. And I worked on that. The 111th Street Jesus I had been wanting to paint a more blatant Jesus figure for some time, rather than always my underground pieces. And that was just an opportunity to do so. There was the Church of the Ascension, a Catholic church in that area. Father Dennis Berry contacted me because a friend of his, who was a friend of mine, knew that I wanted to paint an actual Jesus in the street somewhere. And we put it together with the gang kids. There were 3 gang kids that had survived. 2 of them had become Christians. One was a Catholic, one was a Protestant Christian, and they had bullet holes and knife wounds all over them. They weren't leaders, they were survivors. The things that this gang had done, the Solos gang, was just hair-raising. But these 2 had become Christians. They had seen so much. And he put us all together, and then he brought me, I said, I want a tough Jesus. I'm tired of these effeminate Jesus that you see around. And so he introduced me to this guy whose name was Jesus Reese, by the way.
Right.
And tough guy. He was a welder. And so I used him as my Jesus, which was a Latino community inside of a black community. So there was a lot of action going on there. I remember when we looked at the wall, which is owned by a Korean family. It was a liquor store, Tiger Liquor Store. And there were other places. I thought, that's the place. It just looks like the right place. And I had people, I would work there every weekend. And I had people from all over the community, blacks, whites, elderly people, kids, working on that, because I set it up as a very simple paint-by-number system. And everybody that worked on it owned it. And so consequently, it wouldn't, and the gangs protected it. So for the longest time, it was unmarked. And then finally, a drunk driver ran into it. And wouldn't you know, it was in the correct side of Jesus where the spear would have gone. There was this big gash. I don't believe in this kind of stuff, but it just happened that way. There's no Jesus on any tacos involved or anything like that, but it was, I haven't been down there to see it for years and years, but it was my first sort of blatant Jesus piece. It's sort of a precursor to my one here.
You know, as you look at this Jesus mural today, you know, does it evoke the same feelings that it did when you painted it almost 20 years ago?
Yeah, it put me under more pressure than anything I'd ever done, because the ultimate hero, I mean, I paint heroes, cultural heroes. That's what pushes me on from one project to the next. This is Jesus is the archetype of the Lone Ranger. He's the archetype hero of Superman, of all of them. It's sort of a piece of the real story of Jesus. And so I was really under pressure to do my best work. And it still remains, and whenever anybody asks me what's my best piece, I tell them, technically, my finest piece is the Jesus at Biola, and it is. It is the composition, the olive tree with the shadow of the olive tree, with the shadow of Christ, everything about it with those windows inside the shadows. I'll probably never match it in terms of just a technically fine painting on a building. And yeah, I was very intimidated by the subject matter.
I haven't asked you this question ahead of time, but anything you'd want to say to these Biola students and as a word of encouragement to them as they consider the Jesus mural or art in general, just maybe a closing comment. There's going to be more time, by the way, at lunch in the Jamar Courtyard. It's going to be a free lunch for students. Submitted questions to Mr. Twitchell that you'll have a chance then in an informal way from 11:30 to 1:30. And thank you again for a significant commitment of your time to be here this morning and this afternoon. But any words with the community here that you want to share before we draw this to a close, Kent?
Well, I don't want to cause any division. That's the last thing in the world. If I thought it was going to cause division, I would be here to help you, get rid of it and bring the wall back to the way it was. That was never my hope. I'm sorry that all this has happened. I hope that in some way that God can bring resolution where we're all going to be together and love each other and love the Lord. I leave it to you and to the Lord.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We will be together forever and ever.
Yes.
Every tongue and every tribe and every nation gathered around the throne. And I want to say again, Kent, how glad we are you came today. Not only are you extremely busy, but I know you've been tracking some of the conversation about the word, the Jesus mural, and for us to have you here, it is a profound honor. And I want to say thank you. And thank you not only for this morning, but for this afternoon. We're going to spend a little bit of time later together today, one-on-one, and I'll look forward to that as well. And I'd like for our students one more time to give appreciation to Kent Twitchell.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.